something, but I don't go pinches, Afternoon, Don McKinnon on Agree to Disagree. We have as a guest this evening, I'll say, if that's when you watch it, John Cockerham. My name is Don McKinnon.
I'm John Cockerham. A pleasure to be with you tonight.
And we're going to try to get both pictures on there, John, so we can see who you are. Rather than years ago when I was a boy, there was the shadow nose.
There we go.
There you are.
Yeah.
Anyway, John, what I thought we would start off with is introducing you and therefore myself a little bit, because people think, the Walter O'Brien, Albert Porter, these are old names in the town of Raynham, and I mention them to people and they say, who are they? So there'll come a time when they don't know the people. So a little bit about ourselves into the broadcast maybe might be good.
Sure.
Might sound good. Well, first of all, though, I would like to get in our beginning the political, because it's this month. I believe it's the 25th or something. I think it's on a Tuesday coming up. I'm not sure of the date. But I'm going to say that will be a special election between a Ed Markey and a Gabriel Gomez. And in Agree to Disagree, I'm more or less considered the liberal, although I think I'm middle of the road to conservative locally. I think you see that sometime when I was active. But nationally, I guess you'd say I am more liberal than most people you'll meet in your lifetime, as a matter of fact. And I want to talk a little bit about Ed Markey and a little bit about Gabriel Gomez. To be upfront, truth in lending, is that what they call it? To be upfront, I wasn't originally for Ed Markey. I was for Stephen Lynch. And I think Lynch is the more conservative candidate. As a matter of fact, I will say this, and I'm going to vote for Markey, I can tell you that. But I will say that in the primary between Markey and Lynch, Lynch lost the state election. I think Lynch and Raynham beat Markey like 60-40 or something. It wasn't even close. It was a vote for Lynch. And quite honestly, I was glad to see that. But now, of course, the question is, would Don McKinnon vote for Gabriel Gomez? And I will say, initially, these are the two things coming out of the wire, where Gomez beat two very viable Republican candidates, by the way. Sullivan was one who was well known, and I forget the other gentleman's name, but he is a retired Navy SEAL, and he is a businessman, an investment person, and that's his credentials, whereas Markey has 37 years as a rep, which they're trying to play that against him, which is, what can I say? I was 39 years, so I can't say too much about it. But anyway, John, would you care to give a little reason if you say you are for?
Well, actually, I'm kind of excited about Gabriel Gomez.
Okay.
He's seems to be a very bright young guy, and he's come through quite a bit of adversity in his life to achieve what he did. When we talk about our backgrounds in a minute, I'll compare one of the elements in my background, which is similar to his. And he had quite a bit that he had to overcome in order to get where he is now. Now, you mentioned that he became a Marine. His parents came over from, I believe it was Colombia.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
And they spoke broken English in the home.
Sure.
And he just had so much gumption and so much drive that, as you said, he not only joined the Navy, but he became a Navy pilot as well as a Navy SEAL. And then, of course, he got his education, he got his credentials. Becoming a Navy SEAL is extremely difficult. Maybe 1 out of 5 that go into the school come out of there. So that tells you one thing about the guy right off the bat. Got a tremendous amount of drive.
I'd never second guess a Navy SEAL.
Yeah, and I wouldn't either, at least not to his face.
No.
Yeah. And I would say also that, some people view him as the Republican candidate, but if you look at a number of the issues and where he stands on the issues, he's really kind of a centrist in a lot of ways. He's a moderate. For instance, you could pick both liberal tenets and Republican tenets that he supports. So usually a straight Republican in Massachusetts doesn't have a lot of hope for national office. But in this guy's case, where he kind of runs the middle of the road there in a lot
Might
of
be.
aspects. I think he could be competitive, and I think he could win.
Let me check and make sure I've got dates right, because I'm going to say it, and this goes into reruns. The election is on the 25th of this month, so it's about 3 weeks away.
Okay,
Just to say it for
Yeah.
people who, in case they're wondering when the election is. I will concur with you on everything you've said about this young man.
Oh, wow.
He's self-made. He's got a
Yeah.
appears to be I do. You and I both watch a channel called Fox News.
Yes.
And I watch it for the either the entertainment value. I do like Imus in the morning. I do like that, and I like their news show also.
yeah.
I realize they have a bias towards, let's say, the conservative, Republican, Tea Party, and all that.
Yes, they do, although Bill O'Reilly would dispute that with
And
you.
Bill O'Reilly would dispute everything, including if you argued enough with O'Reilly, he'd be disputing his own name.
Yeah.
That's Bill O'Reilly. But I'm just saying, I enjoy Fox News, but when they get off onto some of those people they have on the news, I don't care much for them, and I don't watch them. But to be fair to me,
Yeah.
I don't watch the liberal people either. I don't care that much
Yeah.
for them. I don't think they're that knowledgeable, and I don't think that the Republican side is that knowledgeable. I do think, however, under the old adage of if you want to be successful, fill a need, I think the Fox network fills a need. And so
I think it does.
So therefore, I do watch Fox. I watch, I think it's, forget the name of the 284, I think, for Raynhamites in the morning. I watch Imus. And then they give a terrific breakdown of the business news also. So I mean, it's well run.
Yeah.
Well run, and that's why it's successful. But having said that,
But it does come out as a conservative channel.
they
I mean,
hope
Bill
they
O'Reilly would.
That's who they cater to.
Bill O'Reilly's mantra is fair and balanced, but if
Yeah.
you watch it over a period of
Yeah.
time, it's clear that they're heavily
Well,
shaded
Sarah
onto the
Palin, when
conservative
she
side.
was successful,
Yeah,
they hired
sure.
her. So yes, and I'm not objecting to that. As a
Right.
matter of fact, they're saying that what is it? NBC, CNBC is. I don't watch it that much, but I do like
Right.
CNN. I do like CNN. I do like the Channel 44, and so that's advertising, and I
Yeah.
do like that. That is everything. But let me get back to, if I'm going to
Sure.
say Gomes, the question is, he's running against a guy named Ed Markey.
Right.
And I've just, for the sake of clarifying for the minutes, what about Ed Markey? Is there something you don't like about Ed
No,
Markey?
there's
or
nothing that I don't like about
Okay.
him, but you described your leanings at the beginning here, and
Yeah.
I probably should describe mine so they know where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
I'm more on the conservative side in some ways, and in some ways I'm on the libertarian side. So when I look at supporting a cause,
Yeah.
if it's an issue, I will just look at the issue as to whether or not I think it's good for the American
So you're not
people or the
voting,
local
well,
community.
in a way, though, you
I'm
are
not just-
voting the man. You're
No,
not,
that's right.
because
I'm not
you're-
voting a
yeah.
party
No,
necessarily.
no, I know that.
But
Yeah.
with a man, what
Yeah.
happens is that generally I'll end up on the conservative side of
Yeah.
things because most of their ideas duplicate my ideas.
Sure.
But it's not because I'm saying, okay,
Yeah.
that's a Republican, I'm going to vote for the Republican, or you, I imagine, would feel the same way. I know that you like to
Well,
look at
I
the
have
issue,
voted for
make up your own
Republicans
mind.
down Life's Road,
Yeah.
as you voted for
I
Democrats.
have voted for
assume.
Democrats. That's
So, I
right.
mean, we've both voted on each side
Right.
of the plate.
Right.
But,
But I
I
think
am
Ed
on, I will,
Markey-
yeah.
I think Ed Markey is, that's more the been there, done that type of candidate, kind of old school type of thing. This guy is a refreshing, young face with some interesting ideas.
So that gives you a reason to vote for him,
Yeah.
other than just that he's conservative.
Oh, yeah.
and-
Oh, well, yeah, and on some issues, for instance, he supports gay marriage. You won't find a lot of conservatives that support gay marriage. So that happens to be something he believes in.
Yeah.
Another advantage that I think he has innately, obviously coming from Colombia, is he speaks Spanish.
Yes.
And given the nature of what's going on
That's
in
a
our
plus.
country,
That's a
that
plus.
could very well be a plus because he can communicate with more of his constituents.
Yes, so I see what you're saying. Now, I'm going to just say about Ed Markey, he is little too liberal for my thinking. But then I have to take him versus Gabriel Gomez. John, I've seen these guys come and go. Let me give you the 2 or 3 things that strike me of a negative nature about Gomez, which isn't the way, but nonetheless. Here's his 3 pitches right now. I know it's going to change the next couple of weeks. He is for term limits. He is for no lobbying, which means no lobbying after you're out, evidently. I guess that's what they're saying. And if you don't balance the budget, no pay. Now, let me take each one of those. And I will say this. When you say these things, you cater to a crowd of people that likes to hear that. Yet he claims he's a fresh face and he's not political. I have never heard more political things to say to cater to a political group who think than those 3 statements. 1, term limits. How many people are for term limits? You know who's for them? The people when they first got elected. Do you know who's not for them after a few terms? The people who were previously for term limits. And my point is, if he were elected, he would go to Washington. Now, the first thing he's going to do, he says, is term limits. So he's going to go to who? He has to go to a person that's been in the Senate or the House for decades and say, I'm for term limits. And they're going to look at him like, well, that's a good thing to say, Senator, and thank you very much. And we will file that legislation, and we will get... Now, no lobbying, that's the lifeblood of the... I don't mean the loser, but I guess I'll say it just to say it because, you know, I do say things. That's the guy that didn't win. And he then has to find an office in Washington to make a living. And most of them, I don't agree. I'm going to tell you, I don't agree with term limits. And that can be a subject sometime in itself, because I say that until a person gains experience in what they're doing, it's very difficult to give too much for them to do. And that opens up Pandora's box. I understand that. But on lobbying, I agree with them on that. I don't think guys should and girls should get this office and then go and become lobbyists afterwards, because
We're both in agreement on
doesn't
that
pass
point.
the smell test. But the last one is a very interesting one. And you know, coming from a town and coming from a state, we balance our budget.
That's right.
But the point of it is, the government can balance the budget if they really choose, federal, because they print money. So if they want to do it, you know more about this than I'll ever know. But I'm just saying, here's the thing, what you've just said to them, though. If you do not balance your budget, number 3, you will not get paid. Well, the man's a millionaire. He's living in a 1.4, $1.2 million house. He made 7 or 8 million in the last 4 or 5 years, and he's saying, well, if I don't balance the budget, I'm not going to get paid. Sir, you don't have to get paid, you see. You can go and do what the old rich do, clip coupons. They used to do that. So what about the guy who's marginally getting by? Yeah. And he's going to go there and not get paid? How in the world can you even...
I don't think, Don, that I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't think that you're going to find many Congress people below the poverty level. And
No, you're not.
I think
No.
they're quite capable of supporting themselves and just taking away their pay. If that were a reasonable approach, I wouldn't be worried that they weren't going to be able to buy groceries
I'll give you the
for them
third
and their
one.
families. But I will say this. I do agree with you that seems like kind of a dire type of tactic. And I feel, as I think you might also, if you get the right people in there and they know the right things to do, there's no reason why they can't balance the budget.
Oh, no, because we do.
Yeah, exactly. We do it all the time.
At
We
the
have to do
local
it.
and the
State
state.
of Massachusetts has to
Balance
do it.
the budget.
So therefore, if you
Yeah.
get the right, and the budget has been balanced in the past. It's not like it never happened. You just have to get the people that are willing. But to say, if for some reason you don't balance the budget this year, you're not going to get paid. What if a war breaks out or something, and they have to spend a lot of money?
And therefore, so the people who signed the pledge that they will not raise taxes, however, are really in a bind if a war does break out or they have a catastrophe and they don't have money in the...
Well, you know, in a case like that, they might sign that they won't raise taxes. But, you know, who was it that said, read my lips, no new taxes?
Yeah, that was George the
That
First.
was a Republican,
George Bush
and he ended up eating his words.
I know,
So
and that's the nature of the business.
there's no
too.
forever. We all know that. But I pretty much agree with that, but I will, given the opportunity here to agree to disagree, I take the other position on term limits. I feel that term limits should be introduced. If it's good enough for the President of the United States, it ought to be good enough for any other congressperson. Now, you made a valid point, and I've always been mindful of this. If you put somebody in a position, they don't necessarily hit the ground running. It takes a while before they are knowledgeable enough to be able to make their optimum contribution. On the other hand, if they're in office too long, they also start to pile up a lot of IOUs. And that's the way it works in politics. And before you know it, you don't have a clean slate. So my idea is 8 years enough to show your stuff. I don't know whether it's 8, I don't know whether it's 10.
Who's running the show, though, do you suppose, in year 9? Is it, in other words, each person's on? Now, you say the president has a limited term. He has a limited term because Franklin Delano Roosevelt ran for office. He was dying at the time. And so, therefore, people really got burnt in getting Harry Truman, which I happen to like Harry Truman. A lot of people liked him. In fact, he won the next election. but basically, it was deceptive. And there are people who believe that, and if you watch what happens to a person who becomes a president, I don't think a human being has enough energy to run for a third term.
Well, you know, you may be right about that because one observation my family and I have both made, and, you know, my wife tells me this and say, gee, look at President Obama now, his way here. And I haven't seen any president that's come through unscathed. That
even George the Younger.
That's right. That looked a lot older. But my point being there that, again, for 8 years...
but there is both sides to this.
There is both sides.
I think this is why,
But you'd have to stagger that because, as you make the point, you can't have everybody leaving office.
The question is, do they come back?
Every 8 years.
There's the next one. And I've never seen this really addressed that much. What would happen if a young president served his 2 terms as the current president, and then after a term or 2 decided maybe you come back? I don't know if anybody's ever addressed that. Probably historians will say, you dope, that was it, but I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. But let me give you the last one, which makes me wonder, John, whether you mentioned how he is independent in a way in some of his thinking.
Yes, he
I'm
is.
not quarreling that, because I'm going to give you 2 terms that I see used on television now. Pond scum is the first one, and dirty Ed is the other one. And I'm looking at that, and I'm saying to myself, do the Republicans really back this young man? And the reason I say that is, it is a known fact that professional politicians do speak that way, but through a spokesperson. And when they are addressed, the main candidate, that do you realize that Mr. McGillicuddy, your chief aide, said that he was a pawn scum and he was dirty Ed? Well, I think I'll talk to him about that. I'm not, but it's been said. It's out there. I always say this, and I think you and I agree on this one. If you have to explain a joke, chances are it's not funny. And if you
I do agree with you.
and if you have to, I'm going to tell you, to this day, John, I understand what dirty Ed means by saying dirty Ed. I have no idea what pond scum. Now, I used to play hockey, and we used to call us swamp hockey players. I understand that. I'd play in a swamp. And if it froze, I played. And if it melted, I went through the ice. So I understand that. Pond. But pond scum. Now, no, what I'm saying this, if the Republicans really like him, how come they haven't sat him down? And I use the word hitman. I don't mean that secretary, but I'm just saying, how come they haven't sat down with him, the professionals, and said, Gomez, you don't say that. We will get that point across, but we will do it.
Well, I think you made a very excellent point where you said that politicians, especially experienced politicians, which he's not,
That's
by the
right.
way.
Oh, I
You
understand
know,
why he did
Yeah,
it.
he's a novice. In other words, he's being straight with you.
Yeah, I
Now,
know.
I can tell you what pond scum is only because I used to fish a lot in fresh water.
You know this.
There is such a thing as pond scum.
okay,
It's
let me-
not generally viewed as a
It's not
as
a
a
comp-
favorable. No, it's not a
John,
compliment.
it's not a compliment.
No, it's not a compliment. But
Well, then what does it mean?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that, though, and that can hurt them in the long run. And
Well,
what
because-
the experienced politicians do is they have their hit people. They let them take the shots, and they
That's
stay
right.
above the fray. And you're
That's-
right about that.
And that's what people do. I
Right.
mean, but then you say, well, wait a minute now. If this guy is this new
Yeah.
that he doesn't understand that, then okay. Sometimes we like to argue for a new face.
but-
but
Right.
hey, the Bay of Pigs. Let's go way back in history. The
Yeah.
Bay of Pigs. John Fitzgerald Kennedy at the time looked probably 10 to 20 years younger than his years, and he went there and had a meeting with
Nikita Khrushchev.
Khrushchev.
Yeah.
And Khrushchev came away thinking, this kid doesn't even know what the hell he's doing. So he ran that as a test. And Kennedy debated it strongly before he actually came out and had what some would say his finest moment
Right.
of backing down Khrushchev. Well, Khrushchev didn't think that the Kennedy would do it, though, because he was new. There is a price to pay for being new.
You're absolutely right.
And I'm just saying
The whole
that's
world was scared at that point, and a lot of people don't have any idea just how close
how
we came.
close it came.
Yeah, very, very
But
close.
I think the original, the one thing about history is, and I like to you like history, I like
Yeah,
history.
very much.
But the point is, we got to admit that 1/3 of it isn't true.
Yeah.
Another third of it is debatable. So you got 1/3 of history that's absolutely true. So, but there is a version that says that Khrushchev looked at Kennedy and said, "I'm not afraid of that kid. I'm going to back that kid down." And so anyway, but that's something which happens with people that have no experience.
I remember seeing a show once to that point that you just made, and it's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah, I do tend to repeat myself, John, but that's
this show had to do with it was a show on American Indians, and the American Indian on the show indicated how history hadn't treated the American
the Native American.
Native
yeah,
Americans
yeah,
fairly.
that's right.
And he said, just
Lot
look
to
at,
be said
go
for that.
back through history and
Yeah.
look at all of the newspapers.
Yeah.
Whenever there was an ambush, whenever there was a massacre or a killing, he said, now, when the white man won, big victory.
Yeah.
There's a big victory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When the Indians won, massacre.
Yeah.
And that's what you're
And
talking
that's
about.
so the victor goes. The support, when you write history, to the victor goes. As a matter of fact, I'm reading a book, which I'm not that deep into it now, but I love it, on Bunker Hill. But now it's referring to Lexington and Concord. And the story I had originally heard
Right.
was that as the troops went forward, they were victorious. But as they returned, the colonialists were shooting them from behind trees. And they gave the Indian or Native American, that's how they changed war at that time,
Yeah.
because and the Native
Yeah.
American, someday we
Yeah.
got to do a thing on the Native American, because I mean to tell you, that is a very interesting topic, especially
That is an
here.
interesting topic.
The largest loss of life, percentage-wise, in the history of this country was King Philip War. But of course it was because there was hardly anybody living here in the first place. But so the Native American has a good gripe. I don't go along with
Yeah, I think
many-
so too.
Yeah,
I think so too,
that's-
yeah.
And anyway, pond scum is what does that mean about fishing?
Well, you could see it in the morning sometimes. If you go into a pond that has a lot of lily pads
lily
in
pads.
it, for instance, and undergrowth,
Yeah.
you don't fish, do you?
I haven't got the patience to fish.
Well, I used to fish all the
Well,
time when I was a
You're
kid.
a man that I admire because
And you'd see this like film
Yeah.
floating across the top of the water.
Yeah.
That's pond scum.
oh,
It's not worth much. And as you pointed out, that was not meant to be
But it's not a compliment.
compliment. No.
I don't see how it's an insult, though. Is it an insult? Pond scum. I mean, he
Well, I
must be a
wouldn't want to
fisherman.
be called pond scum. I mean, I don't think you
John,
would either.
no,
And-
no, John is not a no for John for
no,
pond
not,
scum.
not at all. Absolutely.
But you see what I mean about it. It has to be
yeah.
explained.
Yeah. No,
So,
you're right.
You got to explain.
he'll realize that that'll come back to sting him a few times, and he'll realize that, you know, I can get my point across and accomplish what I need to without being quite that
There's
blatant.
an old adage in
You know,
politics.
pick up a
those
little
who-
finesse.
Those are the gods which to destroy first they release their temper.
Yeah.
And when you see a person really get angry,
Yeah.
you almost say, well, that's the end of
Well,
that.
like you say, I don't want this guy to get angry at me.
Well, at my age, I don't want anyone getting angry at me, but
Yeah,
especially
good
a
point.
Navy SEAL.
Good.
And yeah, I really admire him, and anyone who's a Navy SEAL,
Yeah.
I admire.
Oh, absolutely. I have nothing but complete respect for those people.
That's not what this is all about, though, when
Unbelievable.
you come to vote.
No, I
Well,
know.
that's a little bit, and if you will join me the next time around, we
Sure.
will go into it a little bit more. In 2 weeks from now, we do it every other week.
Mm-hmm.
But what I thought we would do, John, and it was something that Billy Nickerson and I were going to do. Dick and I didn't get around to it. And I'm trying to get Bo Nickerson,
Yeah.
Billy's brother, to
Mm-hmm.
research the history of the Nickersons, because the Nickersons, you came from the Cape originally,
Yes, I
believe,
did.
and the Nickersons are pretty famous,
Yes, they are.
quite
Yeah.
famous down there.
Yeah.
And
That
people,
name is very, very popular down in where I
they
grew up in
founded
Falmouth.
one of the towns down there,
Yeah.
not Falmouth, but
Right.
they did found,
Yeah.
you know. So I was trying to get them to do that. So I wanted you and I to go in just a little bit, and we may say things that people don't even know about us, and they may not even care about us, but that's okay. We've got this hour.
Okay.
and
Yeah,
we'll do
sure.
that. We'll do that. The one thing
be happy to do
things get away from me because I tend to, you know. My friend in Woburn, they say, "What do you McKinnon do?" And he says, "Well, I like to listen, and he likes to talk."
Ah,
So, but I would like you to share
sure.
the story you told me on a guidance council.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason about how that came about, if you
Yeah,
would.
I'd be happy to do that. Well,
Please.
first of all, let me just say that,
Yes.
you know, I moved into Raynham in 1975, and with my wife, Cindy. Cindy, you may know, owns a nursery school here in Raynham called the Learning Loft, with a partner, and that business has been going for about 10 years.
Is that on Elm Street?
It's on Elm Street.
Okay.
That's right. And you know Henry Ellis, I presume.
Henry Ellis and I go
Just-
way back.
Well,
With his father-in-law was,
yeah, his spouse.
his wife is was the partner, evidently.
Yes.
And her father
Yeah.
was the attorney that I used
Right.
in my recount, my first
Oh,
election.
yeah.
Phyllis Siren,
Yeah,
legendary.
that's right. Yeah, and they
Phyllis.
have the law firm
But
there.
anyway.
So
yes.
Judy Ellis
Yeah.
is a partner of my wife Cindy. But let me go all the way back from the beginning. I grew up in Falmouth, as I told you briefly, and I lived with my grandparents. They're the ones that raised me from a baby. They took me in. There's another story behind that.
Yeah.
And we lived on a farm, and it was a 22-acre vegetable farm. And
In Falmouth.
in Falmouth, yeah. And this was actually East Falmouth.
Right.
And we grew everything on that farm. Every type of vegetable that
Did you
could
bring
think
in
of.
workers?
Yes, on occasion,
Yeah.
only during peak season.
Yeah, I know.
Now, our farm was mostly known for corn and strawberries, sweet
Okay.
corn and strawberries. We had the best sweet corn and strawberries anywhere around. They used to come from Connecticut.
Is it still a
in
farm?
Rhode Island? No. Now it's owned by the town.
Oh,
But at the time, we worked very, very hard. A lot of people don't know much about farming. Believe me when I say it's about the hardest work you can do. Whenever they talk about bringing in people from, say, Mexico and so forth, and because a lot of Americans don't want certain jobs,
Right.
farming is one of the big jobs that they talk about, and that's because the work is so hard. So we used to plant all these crops, and then we'd harvest these crops. And I'd be out there in the plowed land, and the wind would be blowing, and sometimes I'd come in and I'd look in the mirror, and I'd have like chocolate around my mouth, like I just ate chocolate ice cream. What that was the dirt being lifted up from the
Wow.
wind
wow.
and hitting me in the face
Wow.
when I was doing the farm work.
How old were you at that time?
From the time I was 9 years old
9 years.
until the time that I got my first job, which was at 17, we worked that farm. Now, we had a big farm tractor, the regular size that you see on TV.
And
the
did your
4-ton
grandfather
tractor.
work it too, though?
He did.
Yeah.
He worked it too, and he worked another job.
And he was what? Oh, he had a regular job also?
Yeah, we made
What I
very,
say,
very little.
regular,
He was a
yeah.
caretaker
Yeah.
for people out in Woods Hole. And he'd come home and he'd work the farm. Meanwhile, my
Wow.
grandmother would work the farm along with me.
Wow.
And then when strawberry season was in bloom, because we had strawberries the size of apples,
Wow.
and I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
They were
Wow.
terrific. They
Wow.
were sweet. And then, of course, the sweet corn was wonderful.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
the butter and sugar corn and so
Yeah,
forth.
yeah.
But what we did is we would sell that at a roadside stand. So from the time I was a little boy, I'd be out in the stand selling to customers that drove down the street.
Yeah.
Now, whatever we couldn't sell, we shipped over to Boston to Quincy Market, and we sold that wholesale. But we never let
People don't remember Quincy Market as you may remember
Yeah.
it, John, because Quincy Market, when I was first working, was basically doing that. They sold
right.
produce and all.
Well,
now
and they
they've
got their produce from a lot of the farmers
down the Cape.
all around because we had to
Yeah.
sell it.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't make any money on that. Maybe we made a few pennies.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is one of the biggest things, just to make this a little shorter, is we used to pick the strawberries on your hands and knees, and your back would be breaking by the end of
Yeah.
the day. You'd
Yeah.
literally scoot along on
Yeah.
your knees between
Yeah.
the rows,
Yeah.
and you'd pick those berries. And what would happen is that by the end of the day, you were sunburned.
Yeah.
You know, you were all bleached out. Tough
Yeah.
work in the middle of the
Yeah.
sun. So I pulled rocks, put rocks in wheelbarrows, pulled weeds,
Hmm.
did all of that stuff. And I was glad when I got my first job, which was working at the Stop and Shop supermarket.
Get away from the.
That I was going to make.
Now,
them-
now, give me the finish for the farm, though. What happened to the farm? Did
Well,
your
what happened to the
grandfather
farm
and mother sell
eventually
it?
is they stopped farming.
Yeah.
And my grandfather, because he loved the farm so much and he
Mm.
worked there all his life with my grandmother, came up to me one time and said, "You know, Johnny," he said, "I'm really sorry that this is going to turn into houses someday and condominiums and
Mm. Yeah.
so forth."
Yeah.
And I never forgot that. So when
Yeah.
it came time to sell his farm later, to distribute it to his heirs,
Hmm.
I made a deal with the town of Falmouth and they bought it for conservation land.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I was always happy
there
about
it
that.
is.
There's a sign there now saying formerly the farm or, yeah.
Isn't that
Yeah.
something?
Now,
Was
when
it
I,
Cockerham now? Was that the name of it? Or was
No,
it
no,
your
that
mother's
was,
side?
that was my mother's side, yeah.
Okay.
That was Tavares, actually. Now, when I went to work for the Stop and Shop, I fell in love with it right away. I started out as a bundle boy, and I figured this is going to be my career. So I worked there for years as I was going to school. And then I decided, well, I said, this is great. I'm just going to keep going up the ladder. So I became a cashier. Then I became a frozen foods manager. Then I became a night crew boss. One day I was telling my grocery manager how to merchandise a package. This gets to your story about the guidance
Yes,
counter.
yes, yeah.
And I said, you know, I think this would look better over here. And he said, John, he said, let me tell you something. He said, in case you don't know, you're paid to work, not to think. And Dawn, that hit me between the eyes like a two-by-four.
The moment of truth.
Yeah, and so I was
Right.
in the doldrums and everything. And
Yeah.
not too long after that, my guidance counselor called me from the high school. I was already out of high school.
How old were you at the time?
I want to say 19 to 20, maybe. 19, maybe.
You've been out 2 years?
Yeah, something like that. And so he said, you know, come on in. And, you know, so I was a little bit concerned. I said,
Yeah.
oh, boy, you know, they're going to find out that I was the guy
Yeah.
who threw the spitballs out the
That's
window.
right. And where's the erasers?
Yeah.
They've gone from the classroom, and
Yeah.
we want them back.
So I walked in the door and I saw him. And he said, John, he says, good to see you. He says, come over here. I want to show you something. And he pulled this file out of his drawer. And he showed me a number on the file. And he says, you know what that is? I said, no, what is it? He says, that's your IQ. I said, yeah? I didn't know much about IQs because, Don, I barely made it out of high school. You know, I screwed around. I didn't do
Yeah.
my work. So he says, you should
Late
be,
bloomers, they
yeah,
call that.
you should be in college, he said.
Yeah.
So I said, oh, wonderful. I said, first of all, I don't have the money. Second of all, you know, I probably don't have the brain. And he said,
Yeah.
you got the brain. He said, I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
He says, would you be willing to go to school for 3 years to get a 2-year degree?
Yeah.
And you have to go 3 years because you got to get all the stuff that you didn't get while you were in school when you were screwing around.
Pay for your sins of your youth.
Since I knew I wasn't going to be a Stop and Shop manager anymore, I figured, why not give it a try? So I went there. I ended up getting an associate's degree from Cape Cod Community College in business administration, and then I went out on the road to get a job. Right around now, I met my wife. Okay, she grew up only a mile from me, by the way, down in Falmouth. So we were like childhood acquaintances.
Yeah.
But anyway, I met my lovely wife at that time, and I was planning on getting married, so I said, I got my associate's degree, I'm going to get my salary, and we're going to start our life. I went out on the street. Second guy I went to, excuse me, said, John, he said, that's very nice. He says, but, you know, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to get a job with that associate's. You need a bachelor's. So I was depressed, and I decided, okay, if that's what I need, that's what I'll get. So I went back to school, and I went to SMU, meanwhile working during the summers. I went to SMU, I got a bachelor's degree in accounting, and now the whole world had opened up. In the interim period, to make money to go to college, I was a small engine mechanic. I was a police officer in Falmouth for 2 years, working full-time summers.
Somebody told me the other day you were that. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if it was Johnny Welsh, but somebody told me you were a policeman down there.
I
and
was
you
a
had told
police-
me
in
you were a
Woods
poli-
Hole.
But they remembered you down there.
Yeah, in Woods Hole.
You probably gave them a warning.
I was tough. I was fair, though.
Tough but fair. You conservatives say
wa-
that, you know.
I was fair. One time I was about to
Tough
tow
but
the
fair.
Kennedy's car, who was parked in front of a fire station, and they quickly dissuaded me from pursuing that. But anyway, I did that for a couple of years.
Yeah.
The mechanic job is funny. I got to tell one quick story
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
An elderly lady came in with her Cadillac one time, and her car was skipping.
Yeah.
And so she said, "Sir," she said, she didn't say sir. She was driving the Cadillac. She
Yeah.
said, "Would you look
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
look at the car? It's skipping." I said, "Okay." I said, "I'll be glad to do that." And then she's telling me, she says, "I'm so sad." And I said, "Why?" She says, "Because I can't find my cat."
Oh.
And I said,
Was
"Oh."
the cat in the engine, John? No kidding.
I
Yeah.
opened up the hood, and there's the cat sprawled across the spark plug.
Oh.
It had been electrocuted.
It was dead?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
So I
Because
had,
sometimes they get down.
yeah, I
the
know.
road.
Well, that's what happened. Only he didn't get out.
Goodness.
So I had to tell her that was a sad thing.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, when I came out with my bachelor's at SMU,
Oh.
which then became UMass Dartmouth, I had a lot of job offers. Had job offers from the IRS.
Oh, wait a minute. The dead cat wasn't a funny story you were going to tell me.
No, that
The
was
cat's
it's an
dead.
interesting story. That's
Oh,
right.
okay. All right. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I love animals.
Now, I got to tell people,
But I
I got to
love
interrupt
dogs.
you just one second
Go ahead.
before you get on to it. I want you to understand how John and I know each other.
Yeah, that's right.
We go back
right.
into maybe the 90s.
Yes.
And John was recruited as the position he will explore in a minute. And he he volunteered for the Finance Committee. And John, there are certain people on the Finance Committee over the years who everyone remembers, and John was one of them. And when we went to a meeting, Marie Smith and I were at this meeting for slots.
Yes.
And John came and sit down. We didn't pay attention to him. Just this guy sitting down.
As is usually the case, by the way.
Yeah, I have that. I say if I rob a bank, I can go in the next day and open a now account because I have that nondescript. But Marie and I both, when you have to give your name. You gave your name. She said, "John's back. John's back." So we found you, and so we
Yeah,
discovered
that's
you.
right.
We're like talent scouts, Marie and I. So we found you. So I just wanted to explain how John became active in the town of Raynham. Now, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No,
on
that's
with your-
okay. That's
with your-
a good point. I did want to serve the community,
Yeah.
and that was one way I did it. And I had to leave because I traveled a lot in my job, which I'm going to get into now.
Yes.
And I graduated from SMU, now UMass Dartmouth, with a bachelor's in accounting. I graduated with honors, so I was fortunate enough to do that.
Yeah.
And then I had offers from the IRS. I'm not glad I didn't take that in view of
We'll talk about them
contemporary
in
things
next
that
show.
are
We'll
there
talk-
today.
That's a tease.
Yeah,
we'll talk
exactly.
about them at the next show.
Accounting firms
Yeah.
and various, Social Security Administration
yeah.
and so forth. And I chose a job that is actually a department of the United States Treasury. It's called the Comptroller of the Currency. And their job is to examine national banks all over the country. They have different areas.
And that's why
where they
you
do
ended up
that.
traveling so much.
That's why I ended up traveling so much. Now, the job was wonderful, and it paid a good salary at the time. I was happy because my wife and I were married, and we had our 2 children. My son James came along in 1977. My daughter Julie came along in 1979. They're both great kids. We're very proud of them right now. And I had to support my family as best as I could.
Yeah,
The problem was a lot of that travel was overnight travel,
Yeah.
and I was away weeks at a time. I had jobs down in Texas, down in Oklahoma, down in Pennsylvania, down in Washington, and I'm not talking about day and night coming back. I'm talking a week at a time, sometimes 2 weeks at a time. I wouldn't get to see them.
Did you actually audit those people? Is that what that was?
Yes, it's an examination, it's called. Well, we were responsible for the safety and soundness of the national banking system. In other words, make sure they're not taking excessive risk.
Yeah.
Make sure they're earning a profit. Make sure they're complying with consumer laws. Make sure that they've got sufficient capital and liquidity and so forth to run a sound operation. That was our job. And if not, we'd go to the board of directors and we'd give them a report and we'd complain to them, and the boards usually would act and they'd straighten things out.
Yeah.
But since I traveled so much, an opportunity came along while I was doing that, and they offered me a vice presidentship in a bank in Rhode Island, a big bank, and I couldn't resist it because I could stay home all the time. So I did that for 3 or 4 years as a vice president in planning and as a vice president in funds management. Then Bank Boston came in and bought out my bank, and I decided, gee, I don't want to stick around here because you know what they do with people when they buy you out.
I know.
Overhead gets slashed.
It's not pleasant.
Exactly. So around that time, they called me from the comptroller of the currency again and said, hey, do you want to come back? You don't have to travel anymore.
Oh.
So I went back for a few years. I did that for a few years, but then a real good opportunity came along. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. They wanted senior examiners, 3 to 4 senior examiners for all of New England to examine all of the banks, the biggest banks in New England. And you were what they call resident examiners. You'd actually be on site in those banks to do what I just told you. Make sure they're not taking excessive loan risk. Make sure that they're serving the consumer. Make sure that they got sufficient capital, liquidity, et cetera. So I did that for 12 years. During my time with the OCC and with the Federal Reserve, I won a number of awards. I won the President of the Federal Reserve Bank Award, which was only given to about half a dozen people out of a couple thousand every year.
Yeah.
I won
You had a good run.
I had a good run. And then after that, I decided, you know what, I'm getting tired. Okay, I'm about 64 now. No, sorry, I'm 54 now. And I'm deciding I'd like to slow down a little bit. So I left the Federal Reserve and I went to work at the Massachusetts Division of Insurance. And I did that as a manager for 10 years, which means essentially doing the same thing with insurance companies that I was doing with the banks.
With the banks.
Now, along the way, Don, I never thought my bachelor's degree was enough, and I was worried I wouldn't be able to meet my family's needs if the economy went south. So I picked up a master's degree along the way from the University of Wisconsin, a graduate degree in banking, which is the equivalent of the master's degree. And then I picked up some professional credentials, too, so I could spread myself out. I got what they call a CFSA. These are the alphabet letters. Chartered Financial Services accounts, and that means that I have the ability to audit investment houses, insurance companies, or banks. That makes me qualified. Then I picked up my chartered life underwriter, which might be more familiar.
Making you jack of all trades.
Jack of all trades and master of none. You got it.
Yeah.
So I ran out of room on my card, and I decided.
Turn the card over to see
decided,
that.
yeah, I decided that was good enough.
Yeah.
So since then, I retired in a couple of years ago. My wife is still working at the nursery school. My son is employed by, he got his degree in psychology from Bridgewater State. And he's a manager with the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission. Helps people with their needs when they have problems. My daughter works for a company called TIC, which is Information and Reading Radio Station that serves southern New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut for the blind.
Yeah.
She reads to the blind and she produces programs.
Wow.
These are for the blind people so they can listen to their radios. She reads newspapers, books, magazines, all of that sort of thing. So I'm very proud of both of them. They're really
They're
helping.
doing very well.
They're helping their community.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Well, you know, the reason I liked your story about the whole story is interesting, and that's why we were so pleased to have you with the Finance Committee, obviously. But the fact that a guidance counselor would go over a record of a student that was marginal and find,
That's true.
however, well, I was too, so I'm not, you know, I was marginal.
Didn't get it together.
Well, I used to say to some of my students, which some of them took it right and some wrong, I used to say, would you invite me to your 28th birthday? And they'd say, well, why do you want me to, you know, why do you want to go to that one? I said, that's when you'll be mature.
Yeah.
Well, they took offense.
Yeah,
Well,
of course.
I'm mature now. I said, no, you.
Well, you remember how mature you were at 16?
not much.
Huh?
Not,
No, not
no,
at the time
no,
you
but
thought you were mature.
oh, sure. That's the
Yeah.
beauty of being alive, and of course, this is why people, they call them late bloomers, because they do develop later in. But to Paul Dooley, who lives in Raynham, and he's an old guidance counselor from Taunton High, and Tommy Hoy was there, the father of the current mayor and all. The guidance counselors sometimes don't get their due, you know, and I really think that's quite a tribute to that gentleman.
Well, I could
to
tell you.
scoff that thing and look at that and say,
Well,
wait a minute now, this
you're right.
guy's got a high IQ. Now, he didn't get good marks, but he has the high IQ, and he talked you into
Don, I
going
used to
back.
take
Yeah.
my books home every night because
Yeah.
my grandparents were watching.
Yeah,
And you know, back in the day, you know how it was back then.
yeah,
You know, if you got in trouble in school, your mother and father didn't go to the school and berate
yeah.
the instructors. If you got in trouble in school, you got in more trouble
That's
when you
right.
came home.
So best you keep
So-
quiet.
So I come
Yeah.
home with my books every
Yeah.
day. So my grandparents say, "Oh, he's doing his homework. That's good, right?" I never cracked a book.
No, no.
I never cracked a book.
And somehow you get out, though, you know.
Yeah.
See, my story, my life is more different in a fashion. I worked on a farm when I was getting out of grade 6. Grade 7 to 9 was a junior high in those days. And the farmer showed me these carrots and a bunch of weeds.
Yeah.
And he said,
Oh.
I want you to weed the carrots.
Ye-
And so his mistake was,
Did not telling you which was which.
no, he left. Oh, he told me which was
Oh, he
which, but
did?
I wasn't too bright. I wasn't paying much attention. And so his mistake was not watching. See?
I see.
So I weeded the whole row, and then I was so proud of what I was doing. And he came and he looked and he says, "Well, you know, Donald," he said, "you've pulled all the carrots.
Yeah.
You've given us 2 rows of weeds." And he said, "Well, we don't want the weeds, Donald, you know." So, but anyway, I did.
That was your career in farming.
Well,
huh?
no, I went to summer and I did.
Oh,
I
good.
got about $9 to $11 a week for 60 hours, worth every penny of it. I
Yeah.
like to say.
Yeah.
And
Oh, absolutely.
I could going home. This was before your time because you're the youth movement at this
Mm-hmm.
venture here. I could spend money on a vanilla frap. I could. In those days, the soda fountains were at the drugstore.
Yeah.
And I would be on my bicycle, and I would go home, and I could go to a drugstore. My mother would let me, and I would buy a vanilla frap, and I was like 10 cents, 15 cents.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the money would go home and go into the house. And so that's the way it
Good
was.
for
in
you.
my
You were
early-
contributing.
yeah,
son?
Sure,
Good,
yeah. And of course, I'll jump into my career a little bit once in a while, but to say that I was working for an insurance company, went in the military, came back, and I was there, and when I first came back, they said, "But we have no job for you now." And I said, "Well, that's very
Was
good of
this
you."
a property and casualty type?
This
company?
was I'm
Or
going to give you
life.
this. Employers Liability
Okay.
Assurance Corporation Limited of London, England.
Yeah. Okay.
And I came back, and I'd worked for them for 2 or 3 years right out of high school, 2 years probably, and I worked for them for another year too. But when I came back, they said, "Well, you know what you used to do?" And I used to do all the assigned risks
Yeah.
from beginning to end. They said, "We can do that with a computer now." I was computerized out of a job.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And they said to me, "We have nothing to do with you." And I says, "Well, let me explain this to you. First of all, you have to take me back. I hate to come back this way, you know. But I says, by law, you got to take me back because I'm a veteran, you know." And so
Yeah.
I said, "But I'll tell you what you do." I says, "You see that desk over there?" I said, "Who's got that?" "Nobody's got that desk." I says, "I'm going to sit at that chair, and I'm going to go around to these different people. I'm going to say, 'Give me what you hate to do, and I will do it for you.'" And that's exactly what I did. And by the time I left, I had to be replaced by a guy with a master's degree from
Yeah,
Northeastern
sure.
University in accounting. And so, but I'm just saying, what happened was, though, that I realized without your same story, John, without that diploma, it wasn't going to happen. And that's why I went back to college. And I paid the price, though, for having gone so long not having been in school, because it was a struggle. The first couple of years were really a struggle
Yeah.
for me. But anyway, it goes back to sort of the same thing.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned community college, because I'm a big fan of community colleges. And I would like to see,
Sometimes that's the pathway.
Well, there are many people I know who went to and you're one of them now, who went to the community college and then went on to a 4-year college from the community college.
And then go on beyond that.
That's right.
But could never have gotten there without the community
That's
college.
right. So the community college is a great thing in my eyes. I think
I
it's
totally
wonderful.
agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
And I just think that if more people who think that they scholastically have a problem going into the 4-year college would go into the community. I'm not
Right.
putting the community down. I'm saying it's for those people who have to. I will give you one short one on sports because there was a football player from Burlington, Mass, and he was 5 touchdowns, the whole 9 yards. Out came the academy to interview him. And they said to him, well, what happened to this course here? And to his guidance counselor. And the guidance counselor says, well, he dropped that course. He wasn't doing well in it.
Yeah.
But he's got all A's and B's. So they said, well, we got another guy to see down the street at Winchester High. So we'll go down to Winchester High and talk to that. And here was this kid, a C student.
Right.
And the guy from Annapolis said, this kid, look at that mark in that subject, that's a terrible mark. And the guidance counselor said to him, let me tell you about that guy. He never quits. He never quits. And if he thinks he's going to fail a thing, he'll still plug to pass that even if he doesn't. Now, he said, you may have to send him on to what we would call a junior college, community college, whatever, prep school, whatever you want to call it. But you put that guy in, he will not only be the best football player in Massachusetts, but he will also pass your courses at Annapolis. And that kid was, and people, old timers are going to remember this, and young people will say, who? Joe Bellino. Joe Bellino went on to Annapolis. You know who's one of his biggest fans? The coach for the New England Patriots, because
Really?
his father was a coach at Annapolis at the time,
Yeah.
and Bellino was like a legend, 5 touchdowns in a game, Heisman Trophy winner, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Joe Bellino doesn't want, if you're watching Joe, which I'm sure you're not, I apologize to you and your family. You don't want to hear this. But that's the kind of student he was. He would never quit. And that's to say there are people that come along later in their life and they become, most people, though, I will say this about military, Annapolis and West Point, most of the athletes don't make it in the pros when they come back because they have a commitment for the college and they have to stay like 4 years. So by the time they get out, they're in their late 20s and they haven't played for 3 to 4
Right.
years and things like that. So usually Joe did play a little bit for the Patriots and he did play a little bit of pro ball. Was it Starback was the
Well,
one
you know,
exception to the
it's
rule.
interesting, Don, that you mentioned that because I'm thinking of the parallel. You're talking about somebody who had a lot of personal drive,
Yeah,
a lot of initiative,
yeah,
but didn't have the paper qualification.
that's right.
Didn't have the
That's
marks,
right, that's
didn't
right,
have the
yeah.
degree, whatever it was. But, so in other words, when they fulfilled the paper qualifications and got the degrees and so forth, that was the credentials catching up to the ability. Whereas
Yeah.
a lot of people go to school
Yeah,
and they get degrees and they've got no drive.
yeah, that's right.
And so, you know,
Yeah.
they don't perform like you might expect based on the paper.
Yeah,
And they're always trying to get their personality or their drive
Yeah.
caught up to their paper. So you never know what
So,
you're going to get. And those are the intangibles
yeah.
when somebody hires somebody
Yeah.
that you never can really look at.
That's why it's difficult to be a personnel
Yeah.
person, to hire that kind. To finish off on Bellino, though, because
Yeah.
the people from the North Shore who live down this way will have remembered Joe Bellino. I cannot think of the writer's name, but he was probably one of the top writers in sports in New England history. And he said that he even rated Bellino as to say who was the most well-rounded, best athlete in the history of New England sports.
Right.
The name that would come to everybody's mouth of my era would be Harry Aganis.
Yes.
But Harry Aganis was an all-scholastic in football, and he was an all-scholastic in baseball. And he went with the Red Sox to prove he could play baseball. If he had lived, he would have played pro ball too, football. But Bellino also played basketball and was all-scholastic in all 3 sports. He was a wonderful baseball player. He was a great football player. But so in other words, this guy said he was probably the most well-rounded. And the irony is, I never hear that much about Joe's still around, and I don't hear that much
Yeah.
about him. But it just shows that sports and academic sometimes don't mix, and sometimes do. Some of your greatest athletes are doctors and lawyers
Absolutely.
and Indian chiefs. As a matter of fact, I'll hit this with the last thing about the Native American.
Yeah.
And you and I talked previously, and we will talk again about the Native American. Probably the greatest, and senior thing, you forget names, you know, Jim Thorpe
Oh,
was probably the greatest all-around athlete in the history of
he was the
Sports.
greatest all-around athlete in the history of sports. I
Sports.
agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So many kids today
yeah.
should read his story because it's absolutely remarkable. It's tragic in a
Yeah,
lot of
I
ways,
know.
but it's absolutely remarkable. And when I was growing up, here's a story that I can attach to that, which you don't know.
Yeah.
My son's name is James David Cockerham. I had two heroes when I was growing up as a boy. One of them was Jim Thorpe.
Oh, see,
That's-
I had a nerve.
That's who I named my son afterwards.
Yeah, isn't that
And
something?
the other one was Davy Crockett.
Ah,
And that's where he got the David. So
isn't that
James
so you
David
got
Cockerham.
both of them in there.
I read everything I could on that
Yeah.
guy, and I was so impressed with him
Yeah.
and what he did. And, you know, I'm coming up. I'm a kid. I'm reading
Yeah,
about him.
yeah. You mean Thorpe?
Jim Thorpe,
Yeah.
yeah, Jim Thorpe. And you know, when I saw his story and that his medals were taken away,
Yeah.
remember, how
Yeah.
silly is this?
I know.
The man played a little baseball during the summer when it was pure
Yeah.
amateur
Yeah.
athleticism.
And they gave him.
They took away his medals.
I know.
Now,
I
you know, you've got these big
I
basketball
know.
players,
Yeah.
all the pros are playing, so
Yeah.
it was ridiculous.
yeah.
Unfortunately, he never found out that he got his medals back because
no.
they gave them to his daughter posthumously.
Yeah. But I believe he
for
was
him.
probably, to my way of my world. As a matter of fact, he played
Oh, really?
against.
We could do a whole show on him.
He played against a defensive halfback
Right.
at West Point. He was playing for the Indian
Yeah.
school, you know.
Yeah.
And boy, they creamed into each other royally. And of course, Thorpe got the better of the game. But the
know.
halfback was Dwight David
Eisenhower. That's right.
was the halfback. So it is a small world.
It
Sports,
is.
You know, I wasn't that good at sports. I enjoy sports,
Yeah.
and I was active in sports, but I obviously wasn't of that nature.
Yeah.
But that's what I love about sports. There's so many great stories, and Thorpe. I hit the nerve with you because that's the man
Oh,
who
absolutely.
I say, as a Native American, the best athlete probably that ever lived.
Yeah.
And
Oh, he was a baseball champion.
Yeah.
He was a football champion. He played all sports. He's the only man ever in the history of the world to have won the Olympic pentathlon and decathlon. The only one before or since. There will
Yeah.
never be another one. That's the one with a half dozen events and the one with 10 events.
Yeah.
And you have to come out with the overall score. He won both of those gold medals, and both of them. Unbelievable.
And they took the medal back.
Yeah,
They took the medal back.
exactly.
So it's been a good show. We're getting near the end, John. You're going to
See that.
stay with us on board for.
I might do that, Don. Sure.
If that-
I'm going to try to have to find some more places where we can disagree. We didn't.
Well, we haven't disagreed that much, but I don't.
we haven't, but I see a few things here that maybe we'll find some.
Oh, we will, and we don't have to because it is the other name of the show is Agree to Agree.
Oh,
And the
well,
the
now
other
that I'm getting older, I think I prefer that.
and then the other part of the show, which I really haven't got into because politics has taken its test on this, would be what were they thinking? And that,
Right.
to me, if you can think of any in the next couple of weeks, we'll be back on in a couple of weeks. And
very
I don't
good.
know whether Michael's going to say that's enough. We thank you all for watching. The tease will be, I'll give you some tease. We're going to talk about the IRS. I got a question on McCain. What was he doing in Syria? What would happen if they had captured him again? What in the world would he have done?
Yeah, well, he had some pictures too that were a little controversial for a while
Well,
because
I
certain
love the guy. I
characters
mean,
in it.
we all are.
Oh, yeah, we
there's
all have
another
to
guy
love
with
McCain.
with the war record. We all love him.
Absolutely.
But what the heck was he thinking in that country?
Yeah, I don't know.
I could picture him being taken off in a jeep to somewhere where
I know.
he yelling out,
Yeah.
pay the fine, whatever it is.
Maybe it's the age, but I have, I get nervous when I have to leave Raynham now.
I know. We got to be careful. We'll be careful. And John, anyway, thank you very much for joining
My
me.
pleasure.
I appreciate it. It's been a good
Been a great
good hour,
conversation.
and I think we've done very well. And everybody will, I'm sure, give us a vote of confidence.
Thank you.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thank you very much for
you.
watching. See you in 2 weeks. That went very well, but